How's that?
Great.
Can you tell?
Yeah, you're good.
Good?
Yeah.
Without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rick Miller. Rick,
All right, Dave.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us with me this afternoon. I know that we're constrained. I got a hard stop at 1:30. Is that right, Dave? So it'll be death by PowerPoint, 54 slides, and your eyes will be glazed over. You'll be glad to get to your next class. And I am a certified old fart, so I like to, meaning I've been in the business almost 40 years, and I'm a little passionate about this topic, meaning if you have questions, tell me to be quiet. ask your question, and I want to be sure we cover it during the presentation. All right, first question. Who in this room, how many of you all believe that wind and solar are going to be our solution to our nation's energy challenges in the future? Good answer. Part of it. One of them. How many of you all might believe that energy storage is a newfangled idea? Man, this is a great crowd. I got one more. Let's see. How many in here believe that solar energy and load are correlated? I've asked these questions to MIT Energy Club and to Duke, and they're not quite as smart as you are. All right, I call this myth busting. We're going to talk about variable energy resources. That's a nice way to talk about wind and solar versus intermittent, the need for greater grid reliability, grid flexibility. And then we're going to talk about pump storage, an energy storage technology that's been around since 1929, a newfangled idea. So we're going to talk about grid operations and where the grid's heading in the future, and then what that means in terms of solutions. The bulk of my project work is in the West, in California, Oregon, Washington, or Alberta. I just happen to sit in Charlotte because that's home. That's where the kids were born. And I worked at Duke Energy for 24 years in Carolinas and in Brazil. So I bring a lot of those perspectives, and ultimately at the end of the day is, how do these projects make money so you can create a business model, have a job, and keep the lights on? So we're going to talk about balancing services, keeping the lights on, oversupply, managing excess energy during the middle of the day, which is occurring every day in California, and then system flexibility. How do we balance all of that? I suspect everybody has seen this iconic duck curve. And what is net load? Net load is simply what the demand on this system that has to be met by conventional generation, anything other than wind and solar. Top line is your load curve, system demand, and the resulting here is this would be variable supply from wind and solar. The bottom of the duck here would be what the demand has to be met by non-wind, so dispatchable resources. And we're going to talk more about this. Well, the reason it's here is the challenge is you have excess energy here in the middle of the day that craters about 4 o'clock, and instead of having a ramp of 2,000 to 3,000 megawatts, because the air conditioning load in California peaks at 7 o'clock in the evening. Well, there's no solar online at 7 o'clock in the evening. So you now have a ramp. When solar begins to drop off, now it's approaching 13,000 megawatts in a 4-hour period every day. So this is what again, another overview of your aggregate load here in the heavy blue line. Solar is the yellow. Here is a very, as your net load, very relatively stable average net load, and here's your average wind supply. We're going to talk myth busting. If this is pretty typical for solar. This is not typical for wind. We're going to talk why. This is what really happens when you look at each aggregate over a 30-day period in a month. But this is what gets modeled is the average of all the solar. Here it is. Here's your average net load. And wind is a spaghetti chart. So we're going to talk about Idaho Power, for example. Here's a run-of-river project that gets dispatched 1 day, 3 days. Here's its generation output. Pretty stable. There's what is an average wind. You see that green line from the previous slide. Here's what it looks like here at Idaho Power. Again, on average, when you average it, here's where models get us in trouble. Well, here's 1 day for wind in February. This is actual data. There's 3 days. 7 days, a week, 14 days. This is what your wind supply variability looks like every month. This is what's called a daily operational nightmare. This is Bonneville Power. I downloaded this middle of October, just a few weeks ago. Let me walk you through what's here. So blue is, well, I'll walk you through top to bottom. Blue is hydro output on the Columbia River system. Red is your load. Looks very typical, where you have a diurnal peak, you have a evening peak here, you're ramping down at night, you have your coming up in the morning. No, I'm off by 24 hours, excuse me. There's your afternoon peak. This is, okay, so it's a morning peak those 2 weeks ago. Drops off, comes back at 5 o'clock, drops off again at midnight, ramps back up in the morning, pretty typical. Then here is this is interchange. Here is what thermal is in the Columbia River area in the Pacific Northwest, thermal being ramped. And here's wind, green. They have about 5,000 megawatts of wind installed in the Columbia River Gorge and Bonneville's Balancing Authority. I'm going to start right and go left. This is a good wind output. Wind is correlated with load. Wind is dropping off on Friday night from about a peak of about 4,000 over 4,200 megawatts, and load is dropping off right there. You see, it looks great, and then it goes down to zero at about 3 o'clock in the morning. We'll back up till Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday. Zero, almost zero wind output for a 2.5-day period. Of 5,000 megawatts of installed capacity, almost zero output. And then back here, this is really bad. You have, this is Sunday, load's dropping off, supply is dropping off from wind as the front has passed through, and then it comes back again. And about 11 o'clock midnight, when load is down here at the minimum, all of a sudden they've got to integrate 3,000 megawatts of wind when they don't need it. How does that make any sense? And if you're a system dispatcher sitting in the hot seat having to keep the grid reliable, this will drive you to the insane asylum. That's their daily challenge. And that's where California is today, Pacific Northwest is today, because we have state energy policies that are driving energy, not long-term planning, not capacity, the things that engineers look at, the grid in total. This is from NREL, and this kind of represents how the grid is operated today, pretty stable, but lots of reliance on coal and ugly electrons. And then here's what it's projected to look like with wind and solar, much more greater variability, and a soon greater flexibility in coal. That doesn't really exist, but it's modeled to exist. Those are the challenges of the evolution going forward. What was PV? 16.5% of, I'm sorry? Okay, good. So how does Denmark is held up as an example of how to bring on wind, a significant amount of wind, and keep their lights on? Well, the only reason Denmark works is part of Nord Pool. Denmark, if it were an islanded nation, it would go dark about half the time, because I'll walk you through the Denmark grid. Physics always come back to wind. Imagine that when it comes to energy supply and energy policy ultimately. All the brown dots here in Denmark represent central heat and power stations, 600 of them. Inflexible. They need to stay on because providing steam for the villages. So they're must-run projects. And then the red dots are centralized, more centralized stations. And here you have big transmission, DC lines to Norway, Sweden, and Germany. There is a one-to-one correlation between wind generation in Denmark and power flows across their DC interconnections. That's how they balance, integrate the grid in Denmark. It's connected to a flexible asset, conventional storage, conventional hydropower. So when you have excess wind here and being produced, it's being stored by that energy is being exported to Norway and Sweden The generation in Norway and Sweden is backed off. The reservoirs are coming up. That's where the electrons are flowing to serve load in Norway and Sweden. And then when the wind drops off right here, the electrons come back to Denmark. It's a great deal for Norway and Sweden because Denmark has the highest power prices in Europe because they are dependent upon their neighbors. They need another energy. They need a complementary technical solution to keep the grid stable. In the U.S., what else is happening? This is California. You've got once-through cooling stations that are being shut down because of fish and train and impingement issues. This doesn't even reflect the decommissioning of nuclear, non-carbon emitting energy at Diablo Canyon and San Onofre that are coming offline before their license has expired. And what's happening in California is system inertia issues. What keeps our grid reliable is the hundreds of thousands of tons of rotating copper, providing frequency regulation that is not going to be replaced by wind and solar.
I'm surprised that Germany is shown as an exporter. I'm assuming they actually are exporting and not doing all the importing.
They are starting to do more importing because what's happening in Germany, who knows, would everybody agree that China is the largest importer of coal in the world for their China stations? What country would be number 2? Germany. Germany is integrating solar by burning more coal. They've shut down nuclear. They haven't built new pump storage. They are the second largest importer of coal. How does that make any sense for greenhouse gas emission policy? Because they have gone so far to incentivize solar in the absence of any complementing technology for long-term planning or wires or grid scale storage. So Germany used to be much more engaged when they had a lot more base supply. Yep. So California has created its own challenges. So let's talk about deregulation in the energy markets. Yes, sir. Well, once-through cooling would be many of the projects at Duke owns on the Catawba River, where you have an intake for a power plant for that water to go through the condensers to condense the steam and let it recycle back into closed loop through the steam generators. And it gets discharged back into the reservoir. The Marshall project up on Lake Norman, where Highway 150 crosses over, or Allen Steam Station on Lake Wiley, or McGuire Nuclear. So you draw in the water in one area of the lake and you discharge it on the other side. So it goes once through. Instead of being in closed loop, recycle like for cooling, they don't have any cooling towers. But what that does is the intakes have to be designed so that you don't suck in fish or you don't impinge them on the trash racks. And which all modern projects are now designed to minimize velocity, so you have what's called escape velocity. The fish can swim way out of the current. That's what one-through cooling is. The projects on the ocean in California were not designed that way. Here's a hydro project that before and after, when it was bid into the mid-continent ISO out in Missouri. So here's how the project was dispatched 10 days before the ancillary services market evolved. Pretty stable dispatch with meeting peak operations here, but generally block loaded for a more stable environment. 10 days after the market was created, this is how those units were dispatched. Getting a dispatch for grid flexibility, but they weren't compensated for it. How is that sustainable? It'd be like taking your car off cruise control on the interstate and going from 0 to 100 continuously, as compared to a stable, which is great if you get paid for it. This is Duke's Bed Creek and Jocassee. There's 2,000 megawatts of energy storage on the Duke Power Energy System. These are These two projects are located just on the North Carolina-South Carolina state line over in the mountains, right on the edge of the Blue Ridge Escarpment. Remarkable territory over there. And red is load. And these are single speed machines. We'll talk about what that means in a minute versus a variable speed. But you've got continuous power input. The units are online pumping. And as load picks up in the morning, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, the pumps or load are dropped off, and you can see the dropped off by unit, and it returns energy back into the system, so you're dropping off load. And so your demand's picking up, so your other projects on your other stations that are online are still able to operate efficiently and more consistently. And then they brought online as generators at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and they're generating throughout the day, following load and frequency regulation. And then you have load peaking in the afternoon, dropping off in the day. Generation drops off, and then when you get load really dropping off after about 8 o'clock at night to midnight, then you turn them around, and they're only idle about 10 minutes. Then you turn them, change direction, bring them on in synchronous condense on a pump mode, and then you load them as load decreases. And you get a remarkable portfolio effect of an optimized system. So we're going to talk about wind integration in the West, where you have we've talked about ramping that's being exacerbated. Wind will typically peak at night, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, and you have negative pricing. So what the duck curve really means is there's planners are now concerned about what the new capacity is going to be, what it's going to provide, as well as and ramping issues. How do we do that? Well, there are a lot of solutions to this challenge. It's not just new copper in the ground. You could curtailment or demand response. The challenge of renewable curtailment, our federal energy policy really has been tax credits, either investment tax credits or production tax credits. Solar and wind generators and some hydropower folks, they get $30 to $35 a megawatt hour in a tax credit for every megawatt hour they generate. Well, if they get curtailed because there's oversupply, because you got to keep the lights on, they don't get the production, so they don't get the tax credits. Much less, even so they could, if they pay somebody $10 to take their power, that's the market price, they still get net $25 because of tax credits. That's what our energy policy has created. So when Bonneville has done that, they get sued by all of the variable suppliers of energy in the Pacific Northwest, including traditional utilities that face that problem, because that's how the performers are made. So we need to improve market structures. We could have new tools in the ground, new tools in the toolbox with either flexible supply in terms of peak gas turbines without a steam cycle, or energy storage, or improved or expanded transmission. But here's the opportunity: is increased modeling capability, increased analytics, because you have a co-optimization challenge of, do you supply energy? Do you provide ancillary services? Do you wait on, if you make a decision today, the decisions you make today are dependent upon what you think the market's going to be tomorrow and how good your crystal ball is. Mm-hmm. Right, demand response is a traditional tool in the toolbox to shut off load. The Nucor plant up here in just north of town that makes rebar, recycles rebar from cars and just scrap steel. They've got a demand response program. I mean, the electrodes that they put in their pots are about the size of this room. But those policies traditionally work when they're not used. Dave and I remember this from our, forgive us, we're both old Duke Energy farts. I'm the old fart, he's not. And you pay folks to interrupt their power until the power gets interrupted. Their business would fund, they have very tight constraints on how long those pots can sit idle before the heat, the metal in there starts to seize up. So those were just like air conditioning demand, like on residential homes or hot water heaters. You know, those programs were pretty sexy 20 years ago, but they started, once they started to test them and use them, then consumers will say, well, I'm not going to lose my air conditioning on the hot heat of the day, because there wasn't enough incentive to put up with the nuisance. So that's the challenge. So one of the things we've talked about, great question, is creating a reverse demand response market. Create load. If you have so much excess supply from 11 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and that you really need to, and having more solar online is a good thing from an environmental perspective when you're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, not making the solar panels, that we need a way to pay some, incentivize investment in something that will create load, that will shift those electrons to when they're really needed, which is what we're talking about here. That here's the ramping challenges. You've got minimum generation challenges, and you got what do we do in a peak in the afternoon to meet that excess energy in the peak of the day. And so added storage will be able to capture this and shift it to when it's really needed, shifting it 4 or 5 hours in the afternoon in California. But there has to be a complementary technology to take the electrons from here to shift them over here, because simply having a longer extension cord 1,000 miles away to a wind farm in Montana or different time zones is just not practical when you look at transmission line losses. So here's what's happening with reverse energy pricing in California. And again, how do you make money or not? And here's the frequency of when negative pricing is occurring. This is 13 and 14. I just didn't have the time to bring it up to date to 2016. But the problem's significantly worse than it was in 14. Here's the negative pricing at noon and 1 o'clock in the afternoon in California, down in Southern California. It's negative $100. So here's what California energy market is today, where there are opportunities for new technologies. And is that clock in the wall correct? It's 5 till the hour. Is that right? Okay. If you're going to meet this ramp, right? Whoop, let me do this correct. If you're going to meet this ramp here, traditional thermal technologies, either coal or gas turbines, if you have a steam cycle particularly, have to be online during this excess supply period in order to be able to meet this afternoon ramp. So you have to bid into the market and be contributing to the excess supply problem. So you're paying somebody to take your energy, as we saw the negative pricing. So you're paying somebody to take it, but the ISO will pay you what's called a resource adequacy payment, because they really got to have you for the afternoon ramp. But they won't mitigate your problem of negative pricing. So it's like my house with my wife sometimes. Money comes in one hand is going out the other hand. I've been married 40 years, so I get that. She still puts up with me. That's the craziness of our markets. And this is now continuing every day, such that the largest pump storage project in California, the Helms project, instead of pumping at 3 o'clock in the morning, it is now pumping every day from 11 in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It has completely inverted the grid operations in California. So this chart here is from the Energy Storage Association. Talks about all of the capabilities of all of the many of the storage technologies, primarily batteries, flow batteries, vanadium, sodium, sulfur. And here it is, the x-axis is rated power, and here's time on the on the vertical axis. I remember looking at this between Christmas and New Year's, what I do during my Christmas vacation. I mean, this makes no sense to me. Why is pump storage up here in the upper right-hand corner? Here's compressed air. There's sodium, sulfur. And then I realized this is log scale. I'm thinking, I've never known a dispatcher that operated in logarithmic time. So I converted it to linear scale. So here it is in power and linear scale, same thing for time in hours. And so here, all of the battery storage technologies, here's compressed air, and here's the sphere of influence of grid scale pump storage. That's what a grid operator sees every day. And so the point of this is batteries are a great distributed storage solution at substations, behind the meters of a home. But for a centralized grid, for the demand that we have in this country, there's not enough capacity and size to make it work. You've got to have other grid scale storage of, excuse me, hundreds of megawatts and thousands of megawatt hours. So, and this is pump storage is about, there's more than this now, it's about 130,000 megawatts installed globally. And then what is pump storage and how does it work? Pretty obvious. Your generation mode, you're taking it from an upper lake, upper reservoir down a penstock into typically an underground powerhouse, and then releasing it into the lower reservoir. And then at night, you simply reverse the momentum of the water. You turn the pumps in here, and you pump it back uphill. Here's the map of the existing 40 projects in the United States. The bulk are in the east, primarily driven by the build out of the nuclear program back in the 60s and 70s and 80s to provide some flexibility and shock absorber to the grid for this base-loaded non-carbon emitting technology. There are 14 in the Western Interconnect. Over here, the largest being Castaic in Los Angeles Department of Water Power. And it's in a remarkable business model because I'll walk you through it briefly. Here's the Columbia River system, lots of cheap hydropower. There's a DC intertie starting about here, dead ends right there. And so Castaic and LADWP, they get to pump with really cheap power. It costs them less than a penny. And they get to sell it all around. They're surrounded by Southern Cal Edison. California has the highest power rates in the United States at 35 cents a kilowatt hour. It's almost energy-induced poverty. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Sure. You're asking about what's the turnaround and cycle efficiency of a pump storage project. The typical efficiency for modern stations is about 80%. So for every 5 units of energy units that are pumped, you can recover 4 units of that. So it's about an 80% cycle efficiency when you, including the generator losses, turbine, water momentum losses, as well as transformer losses. So that's an all-in figure. So it's a net energy consumer. But what it does, it provides the value, the shock absorber to the grid. And there are 14 in the Western Interconnect, but of these 14, 10 of them are associated with water supply projects. And their primary mission is moving water and meeting water supply for irrigation. So they're not really used for power. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, does what include the? Yeah. Well, that's the, I'm not sure what you mean by maintenance for an efficiency. If you, right. Sure, well, that comes into your financial model. I mean, you've got to have maintenance. Are you talking about outages and things like that to do the maintenance, the loss of availability? I mean, the units can be online 95, 96% of the time in terms of being available for 365 days a year. You have minimal amount of forced outage time. I don't know if that's answering your question though, but the actual efficiency of, like, how many miles per gallon are you going to get out of your car? The efficiency of operation from an energy perspective, you're going to be able to recover 80% of the energy back that you require to pump, if that answers it. I don't think I am, but we'll talk about it after this.
How does that add power to the grid?
It doesn't. That's a great question. It shifts power to the grid. That's right. It's not an energy creator. It's simply you're storing it where it's not needed, and you're going to supply it when it really is needed at a much higher value, because we're back to the Bonneville Power example of when there was excess generation at midnight Sunday night when there was no demand for it. You either got to curtail it or you shift it to the next day when you really need it. Mm-hmm. So generally,
do they pump it at night then?
we used to. I mean, back, when I had those two projects, Bad Creek and Jocassee, were in my asset management portfolio. And we used to pump every night. We shut the pumps off in the morning. We generate throughout the day. Then we'd start about 10 o'clock at night, turning around as pumps. On the weekends, when demand was lower, we'd pump longer periods of time. So the upper reservoir would be at its highest on Monday morning and its lowest Friday afternoon. But that has completely changed in California, where they're called valley time. The minimum demand for power is between 11 a.m. and 2 o'clock in the afternoon every day. It's completely backwards because you have so much excess supply that you must integrate solar. But again, back to the question of energy consumption, is there's so much excess energy that you don't need from 11 to 2 in the afternoon, but they're desperate for it at 7 o'clock at night. That's the peak demand for air conditioning, particularly in the Central Valley. So here's what we had in terms of projects, megawatts in operation for pump storage globally. This is a little dated. This number is now 0. This is where pump storage is being built globally: China, Japan, and in particular the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, and Portugal. Spain and Portugal, Spain and France, you got to go back to the Crusades. They don't like each other very much. So it's really weak transmission interconnections. So they're somewhat dependent on each other, and they have a pretty healthy wind and solar build-out program. They are building 3 pump storage projects today. And I think I just talked about that. And so here is a map of where projects are being considered in the United States, this newfangled technology that's been around for almost 100 years. And unfortunately, not one of these projects is under construction. The one that was near and dear to my heart is there's a little dot over here somewhere for Iowa Hills. It was starting to be under construction last year. We were the engineer for the project. Underground powerhouse. The lower reservoir is already existing, utilizing existing infrastructure. You just had a small mountain right on top, right next to it, that was not used for farming or for nobody lived up there, not used for grazing. Physics didn't kill it, politics killed it. Yes, David. Yeah. That's a great question. There's not really the need for the grid here because you don't have the market drivers. We don't have the wind and solar integration challenge here that we have in the West. And you've got plenty of flexibility. You've got 2,000 megawatts of a battery here in the Carolinas already. That doesn't really exist up here to the extent of the grid demand in California. There's one here in Washington State, Banks Lake, but it's a water supply project. It's not a power project. You've got some down here in Georgia. The largest in the world is here at Bath County in Virginia. So there's plenty of grid flexibility already, so you don't have the market drivers. Now Duke has announced their project. Yes, ma'am? I'm sorry?
Isn't North Carolina the third state in the U.S. for installed solar?
Number two. I mean, it's remarkable. So that's why Duke is right now looking at upgrading their Bad Creek project. We commissioned it. Well, I was there at the time in 1991. It's not even 20. It's only 25 years old. The machines work great. They need greater energy absorption. Because there's so much solar coming online. So they're going to put in brand new machines on those units. We're doing the engineering. Like some of my graduates from here are doing the engineering right now on that project. Great example. And because of the solar initiatives here in the state. There's got to be, though, a complementing technology to work with solar in our state if we're going to keep the lights on. So it's like where are the business models? Where is there the market need for greater grid flexibility? Well, it's really not in the East. It's all in the West. Because you also have a much more aggressive decommissioning culture in the West. And like organizations like Seattle City Light, they do not want any brown electrons in their grid. It's either green or blue. So where they have conventional hydropower in Washington State, we're helping them modernize their fleet up there to extract more electrons out of the same flow of water. So this is the market, but not one is getting built today. The most obvious one that should be built is right about here. It's Eagle Mountain. Where is Eagle Mountain? Right there. It is 50 miles east of Palm Desert. It looks like the moon when you drive over there. It's two abandoned iron ore quarries. They're about 1,400 feet apart in elevation. There's nobody anywhere near the site. And it has its FERC license. It has its water supply contracts. They can't get a purchase power agreement, get long-term financing. Because get back to the analytics. And it's a remarkable site in the middle of huge transmission going from Vegas to LA and all the solar. No, it's, how do I say this politically correctly? So you have three energy agencies in California. You have CalISO, which operates the grid, but they operate keep the grid. Then you have California Public Utility Commission. Well, they only oversee the investor-owned utilities, PG&E, Southern Cal Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. And then you have the California Energy Commission. Those three state agencies hate each other. And so not one of them is going to say, well, there's not enough evidence. Empirical evidence says you need storage, and so we're not going to allow you to rate base at PG&E. So therefore, you can't go into a purchase power agreement because we're not going to let you recover that cost from your ratepayers. And CalISO's over there like, please give me some storage. They don't, it's politics. Imagine that. That's what's driving them nuts. Yes, sir.
One means of transferring the power into storage. What are the other alternatives? This is a project. This is a large scale. So what are other alternatives?
But so there is a huge battery market in California, but I was looking at the data yesterday preparing to come in here. I just ran it. I couldn't get it put into my slide. I figured I had enough slides. There's a presumption that what's really driving the California market is distributed solar, rooftop solar. When actually the latest data from CalISO, that's only about 20% of the solar supply. It's more of the central solar, meaning 500 megawatt wind solar farms that are right adjacent to the Eagle Mountain project out here in the Coachella Valley. And that's what's doing, so there's not CalISO, the CPUC and California Energy Commission believe that distributed storage batteries are going to be that technical solution. And CalISO guys are saying we need we got to have central storage because there's so much to capture. You're about 5-6 slides ahead of me. The cost was about cost, and I've got a few more minutes, so thank you. So here's what a cross-section of a typical pump storage project looks like. This is Duke's Bad Creek project, upper reservoir here. Goes down about, this is about 1,200 feet in elevation, underground powerhouse in the middle of a mountain, and it's on the shoreline of Lake Jocassee, there in upstate South Carolina. And the key thing here is, and so you're there, the only thing you see is a big farm pond of about 200 acres, surrounded by trees. And the key thing is submergence. The center line of the pumps have to be about 10% of the total head from here to here. There has to be about 10% of that elevation difference of submergence. So if it's 1,200 feet total head difference, then the center line of the pumps have to be about 120 feet below the minimum level of Lake Jocassee. You don't want to starve the machines of water. You've got to prime the pump. And then 3 modes of operation, typical pumping, generating. And the way a pump turbine starts is you're over here in condensing, and come back to engineering, you have to call depressing air. You inject air in the runner chamber, you push the water that's here in the draft tube. This is going to your Lake Jocassee lower reservoir, and you start the pump and spinning in air. It's incredibly expensive to start the pump rotating in water and with all that friction. So you're putting depressing air. You start it in spinning in air, you synchronize it, then you open the gates, and then you come up, and then you start pumping uphill. And you go through commissioning, testing. If you stand on top of the head cover right there, and if you have a disconnect and you're trying to pump, and so the turbine at 500 tons of mass is rotating in the pump direction, and if you miss the timing to open the valves, the gates to let the water come in, let the water go uphill. But the timing's off, so the water's coming through in the generate direction. The water is screaming under 1,200 feet ahead, going in the opposite direction that the pump impeller is rotating, and you'll just want to bring a change of clothes because you just got to change your underwear. You just think the world is coming to an end. And you're 500 feet in the mountain underground, and it's black. So this is the site of the Eagle Mountain project. And I said the moon is the moon. And abandoned iron ore mine, and it's the perfect brownfield reclamation site for a 1,400 megawatt scale storage battery that would last about 20 hours if you ran it continuously. And it will provide fast response, incandescent reserves. There's a perspective that only batteries can provide millisecond and microsecond frequency regulations and grid reliability. This is what existing machines can do today. Here's power quality. This is time. This is energy management, is really shifting energy from least value to higher value. And then you get variable speed machines, which get into microsecond power quality type response. What's new in the technology is going to a full power pump and frequency inverter, so that if you have a 100 megawatt machine, you have a 100 megawatt power frequency converter, and you have almost unlimited operational flexibility. That's a honking big machine. It's not quite as big as this room. It's about as big as half of this room. But it gives you remarkable flexibility. And we get the value of, again, investing in this new technology, variable speed machines. You don't have to change the momentum of the water to change the speed of the machine. It's about the power electronics and power frequency. And it's what and it allows you to provide frequency regulation and incremental, decremental reserves moving up and down when you're pumping, which is exactly what you need when you have excess supply from wind and solar. I've never seen a gas turbine work backwards to do that. And then you have a much broader operating range. But these are the things that applying these capabilities in for our clients and these engineering challenges is kind of what many of the things that our team does. I want to get way too detailed on what a doubly fed induction machine is. Just a taller generator. The wet side, the turbine side is almost identical, but you have a much different generator capability. ABB here in town designed some of these machines on the generator side. And we talked about the flexibility and time scale. I'm going to move through this. The challenge is, where do you make money? Because here's the long-term planning that our regulators are struggling with, and here's then your real-time operations of where you get compensated. Back to the cost issue. I put this together out of these series of reports from National Renewable Energy Lab and EPRI, and this is your cost in euros, but almost equal to the dollar, but it's all relative. Here on the vertical scale, these are energy storage technologies, and here's pump storage here, and this is your battery. This is in terms of installed cost per kilowatt. Well, they're all, on average, they're probably pretty reasonable. But then you get on an energy perspective, on a kilowatt hour basis. And here's pump storage, because again, back to the sense of scale, of grid scale storage, and here's what batteries do, because they have so little energy capability capacity, because the battery's going to only operate for 15 minutes, maybe an hour, versus days. And so pump storage, I believe, is the best partner, and this is the Bear Swamp project in western Massachusetts. This also looks like Bad Creek down in South Carolina, a big farm pond. Intakes down here, and the powerhouse is stuck there right underneath the mountain. That's your infrastructure impact. A lot of them are. Many of them are closed loops. You're not building new dams on main stem rivers. That's not going to happen for power in this country. It will for water supply. But they're finding there are many sites, either abandoned mines or just where there's low value land. It might be even grazing rights have pretty much expired. It's another repurpose of the land without damming up main stem rivers, which are a significant issue. Other questions? We have 9 minutes. Yes, sir. Yes. Mm-hmm. What the question was, what really are the cross-border or the electrical interconnections between Canada and the U.S.? I don't think I have that. I have Manitoba Hydro's business model is to rescue the United States from ourselves. They are building 5,000 megawatts of conventional hydropower in Manitoba. They're building large-scale 500 kV transmission down to Minnesota. We're doing the engineering for that line, because they're going to be the conventional battery for the upper Midwest of the United States. And so Hydro-Quebec does that today for New York and New England. And so there's greater transmission capability going north-south from Canada to the U.S. than there is across the provinces. So but from an American perspective, our jobs will follow and our money will follow the electrons, and we'll be enriching Manitoba. That's their business model, and they're being very successful at it. Yes, Dave. In Georgia, Tennessee, yeah.
Beautiful part of the southern Appalachians, but not all
travel to, a lot of folks don't realize the Appalachians come down that far south. Beautiful, beautiful territory up there. And these nuke energy facilities are there.
Yep.
So you have Bad Creek, Decommissioning, Kiwi,
Right.
and then all that feeds to a Corps of Engineers lake, Hartwell. So in addition to all this pump storage technology, how do they balance that? There's a lot of recreational activity on the lake.
Mhm.
Water levels have to be maintained. Kiwi provides drinking water to bring from South Carolina. How's
Correct.
that maintained?
Yep.
How do you protect all the fish and environmental concerns? How do you honor your water transfer agreement with the Corps of Engineers? How do you balance all that?
I used to manage those stations for 4 years back in the late 80s, early 90s. There's a weekly coordination agreement. There's an agreement with the Corps of Engineers for a weekly coordination call. So you balance the storage in Lake Kiwi and Lake Jocassee have to be balanced with the storage available in Hartwell and Thurman downstream. Okay, and not Richard B. Russell. And that's trued up every week. So they do that on Thursday to schedule the generation for the following week. But what the Corps of Engineers dispatch is by Southeastern Power Administration, and they're in Elberton. They are focused only on electrons. They're not looking at how much water inflow there is. So they'll suck those lakes dry. There is a drought management protocol, which they have implemented because they're having another drought of record up in the Western Carolinas, Eastern Tennessee. And so you have that juggling act between the federal government and Duke Energy. Then Duke Energy has a federal operating license that dictates their operating limits for Lake Kiwi and Lake Jocassee, but those are somewhat intertwined with the balancing agreement between the Corps and Corps and Duke. And then you have the Oconee Nuclear Station, which is what Lake Kiwi was built for cooling water for Oconee Nuclear. And but they found out through testing that you can't, if you pull Lake Kiwi down as far as it's allowed to from its operating license, it puts the nuclear station at risk for not enough cooling water, not enough water to prime the intake pumps. All of that's an interplay that, again, back to engineering challenges, when you're working on all that realizing, we developed an operations model that captured all of that. So there's a lot of opportunities for applying engineering skills in ways that, how do you make all this work together? Yeah, I mean, the Blue Ridge Escarpment is a fascinating geography piece that extends all the way from northeast Georgia up through middle Virginia. And the highest rainfall in the United States is outside of Cashers and near Franklin. And I can't even think of the town, it's escaping me at the moment. And they get 80 inches a year. When the weather patterns come up from the Gulf, they hit the escarpment and it just wrings the water out. It is amazing. It's like a rainforest down there. And so within about 3 or 4 miles, there's about 6,000 feet of elevation change, and it's remarkable topography around the rim of Lake Jocassee, where Gorgeous State Park is. And there used to be 4 other pump storage sites located around the rim of Lake Jocassee. For topography, it was beautiful. I mean, access, you couldn't afford to build it. And environmentally, it did make a lot of sense. So, but we can expand Bad Creek to create Bad Creek 2, which they're looking at. And there is no incremental environmental impact. But it is remarkable country, but all that gets interrelated into operations. Another question. Have I put you all to sleep? Yes, sir.
I have a question about what you talked about, China and Germany importing coal.
Yeah.
That coal works, but you produce solar panels which last a couple of decades. Was there any study which proves that it's not, doesn't make any sense to use coal to produce solar panels? Is there any study?
I'm sorry, I got some of that, but I didn't get all of your question. Would you repeat it one more time, please?
You talked about Germany and China
Yes.
importing coal.
Yes.
And using their coal to make solar panels.
Yeah.
And I think what I received, you said that it doesn't make sense to use coal to produce solar panels because coal contributes in emission, carbon dioxide emission a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But is there any study, because you burn coal once, but you make solar panels which last for more than 2 decades? Was there any calculation or study which proves that using coal to produce solar panels is not feasible.
Let me modify that just a little bit. When I was mentioning about Germany, Germany is integrating solar energy from those solar panels by burning coal, for the grid reliability. China's doing the same thing. Now, for the manufacturing sector in China is support, maybe making batteries is incredibly, if you look at the entire life cycle of a component, solar panels or batteries, they have a significant environmental footprint. Now, you do have some, a long life. I mean, solar energy does have value, but it needs a complementing technology if you're going to keep the grid reliable, which is what I was trying to make my point of back to Germany. Any other questions? All right. You need yes, nuclear is, if you're serious about greenhouse gas emissions, and the NRDC has come to this conclusion, as have a few others, and Union Concerned Scientists, you've got to advocate for nuclear, but you've also got to advocate for what do you do with this spent fuel. Because it's in a gussied up swimming pool and it's glowing in borated water, and it's like, man, this stuff really is nasty. And you better do something with it. You've got to have a whole long-term solution, but you've got to have it.
Rick, thanks for a great presentation.
Oh, you're welcome. All right.
It's been a few weeks since we got to use an umbrella in Charlotte, but I know you traveled.
I appreciate that.
Next time you go out to Seattle, take that with you.
I'll take it. I'll carry this with pride. Thank you very much.
Thanks for attending.
Thank you all.